So welcome everyone. Okay, in the 6th century, Common Era, a great Indian Buddhist teacher called Bodhidharma travelled to China to teach the Dharma. And during his time there, he had an encounter with the Emperor of China. And the Emperor of China asked Bodhidharma, what is the essence of Buddhism? I think philosophy was very big in China, and the emperor expected a philosophical answer. But what Bodhidharma gave him was a verse from the Dhammapada. He said the essence of Buddhism is to do good, to abstain from doing evil, and to purify the mind. That was all he said. And the Chinese emperor was distinctly unimpressed. And he said, a child of 3 could understand that. And Bodhidharma's response was a little bit cutting. He says, yes, a child of 3 could understand it, but a man of 80 is not able to practice it. So intellectual understanding is not enough in Buddhism. Because what actually moves us to live our lives is our deeper emotional attitudes. Because whether we like it or not, we are creatures of desire. We are beings of desire. And our emotional depths need to be acknowledged, need to be engaged with, need to be transformed. Sangha Night, our teacher, goes so far as to say that the spiritual life is mainly concerned with the reorientation of emotion, the channeling of desire. So yes, Buddhism is in many ways a rational tradition, but it also speaks to our deeper drives. It speaks the language of the depths. So for this reason, our theme for this year, for the whole year, is to explore the language of the depths, the language of myth, story, symbol and archetype. And we do that in order to fire up our emotions so that we're able to walk the walk, not just talk the talk. And within that theme, we are looking at 5 great stages of the spiritual path, or the system of spiritual practice. And so far, and those 5 stages are integration, positive emotion, spiritual death, spiritual rebirth, and spiritual receptivity. And so far, in the year, we've had a series of talks on the stage of integration. So, gathering all the different aspects of ourselves together, our shadowy depths and uglier drives, as well as our unexpressed heights and our fullest potential. And getting in touch with both of those actually can be quite unsettling, sometimes frightening. But through doing that, we get as much of ourselves as possible moving in one direction, so that we're able to make a realistic commitment that we can stick to. And tonight, we're moving on to the second great stage, the stage of positive emotion. So this is the first talk in a series on positive emotion. So there are many positive emotions described in Buddhist teachings, but the fundamental positive emotion that runs through them all, out of which they all emerge, is metta, which you will have encountered in the metta bhavana practice particularly. So this is often translated as loving kindness, as in the first ethical precept, with deeds of loving kindness I purify my body. But the word metta is actually related to the word mitra, which is friend. So literally, its translation is friendliness. But it's a friendliness that can be carried to a far higher pitch of intensity than we're used to. So metta is not just a warm, glowy feeling of friendliness. What is really important about metta is a strong desire for the well-being of others, and also the intention to act on that where possible, where appropriate. So as well as friendliness in an ordinary sense, metta is a very sublime goal. Metta in its fullest, purest sense is a sublime goal. It's an intensely strong emotion. In the Karaniya Metta Sutta, it's compared to a mother's love for her only child. And in other suttas, metta is described as blazing forth bright and brilliant. So it has the passion and the fieriness and the full-bloodedness of which we usually associate with intense romantic longing. But rather than having a single object, it's all-embracing, all-inclusive. And unlike romantic love, it's not possessive, it's not conditional. So metta in its fullest form is entirely without possessiveness, without condition, without hostility. It's an expansive emotion, always moving outwards. Now, we often make a distinction between reason and emotion. But metta is actually described as a rational emotion. And what we mean by that is it is appropriate to reality. Metta is a response that arises naturally out of seeing things the way that they actually are. It has the flavour of insight, flavour of wisdom, taste of freedom. So metta bhavana is not just a beginner's practice. Actually, metta is one of a set of 4 emotions which are described as immeasurable emotions. It means you can never come to the end of it. You can never come to the end of metta. So that's a description of metta in its fullest sense, a glimpse of what could be. But as has been pointed out in the last few weeks, we have to start from where we actually are, how we actually feel. So we need to be very honest and realistic about where our longings, where our passions, where our energies actually are directed. If we're to have a chance of doing something with that, with cultivating and refining it. So this is why the stage of positive emotion goes alongside integration. So actually these 2 stages feed off each other. We can only, as Bojanaga talked about in his talk, we can only integrate the energy of our uglier drives if we turn towards them with kindness. And metta can only really be cultivated if we've begun the messy process of pulling ourselves together. Otherwise, we're unable to follow through on any glimmerings of warmth and friendliness, unable to concentrate them. And before we know it, our interest has turned somewhere else. Our unconscious drives have been hijacked. So we start from where we are. And for myself, that very often seems quite a long way from blazing, all-embracing, unconditional, unpossessive love. And that is exactly why the Buddhist tradition teaches a practice that is a tool to help us to start to bridge the gap from where we actually are to that more sublime goal. So, whatever our opinions of ourselves on any given day, we can't really deny that of all beings in the universe, there is one who is of particular concern to us. We take its feelings and thoughts most seriously, we protect it most vigorously, and we work really, really hard to secure its advantage. And somewhere in all of that lies the seed of a very positive emotion, a concern that can be intensified and extended out. So metta is nearly always described in the teachings as being a very powerful and transformative emotion. And in the rest of this talk, I'm going to be concentrating on the power of metta. And I'll be looking at 4 areas. Power of metta to benefit ourselves. Power of metta to benefit others. The power of metta to create Sangha. I'll be talking most about that. And then finally, the power of metta to take us beyond notions of self and other. So the Buddha himself pointed out the transformative power of metta on ourselves. Even though that's not primarily why one practices metta, why one develops metta, there is actually a positive effect on ourselves. So from one of the suttas, suppose there were a pond with clear, agreeable, cool water, transparent with smooth banks, delightful. If a man scorched and exhausted by hot weather, weary, parched and thirsty, having come upon the pond, would quench his thirst and his heat stroke. So too, one develops metta and thereby gains internal peace. And the 4th century Indian monk Buddha Ghosha expands on this. He lists other advantages, such as sleeping comfortably, having sweet dreams, waking up easily, becoming attractive to others, improved concentration, increased energy, and actual protection from danger. And the analogy for this is a hunter's spear bouncing off a cow's body because of her love for her calf. I'm not sure how often that actually happens. And in the Karaniya Metta Sutta, it describes someone who develops metta is said to dwell in heaven right here and now. So I just want to talk for a few minutes about my dad. My dad was very ill about a month ago, and at the time I promised myself in my next talk I was going to talk about it, so here I am. So my father was a really good role model for someone who reached out to others with kindness. He worked as a Christian minister and then as a social worker until about my age. And when he was about my age now, he developed multiple sclerosis, which he's been managing for 30 years now. 30 years. And he carried on working as a social worker. And he also did a lot of voluntary work in Samaritans and Citizens Advice Bureau. And what I'm really grateful for was, so I was 13 when he developed that illness, and it was quite a big episode in our family's history, but my dad really went out of his way to protect his 3 boys from the effects of that, and just really sort of treat us with the same love that he'd always treated us. And then, so he lived at home, and my mum looked after him. And so multiple sclerosis is a disease of the nervous system, and it's a progressive disease, so it's a very slowly degenerating condition. Eventually he needed the use of a wheelchair. But he lived at home for as long as possible. And then 7 years ago, he developed an infection on his leg, and he was told that he'd have to have his leg amputated. And so I remember going to see him in hospital, and I could really see that he'd faced his mortality. Just the way that he was talking about prayers that he'd been saying, and he was very sort of sober. And then the day after the operation, we all went to see him, and he just announced that he'd chosen to go and live in a care home out of love for my mother, because he didn't want her to look after her anymore. And so he went to live in a care home, quite near to my mother's. And it was really obvious from the moment that he went there that this was another vocation for him. This was his next mission. He was going to go there, and he was going to reach out to all the elderly people in that home. In a way, he was just going to do what he'd always done, and put other people first. And he's still there, and go and see him regularly. And he really obviously makes a big difference in that environment. He takes an interest in people, really cares about people, remembers what people have said to him, and is really kind to the care staff, really understanding. And the point I'm making with this story in this section is that my dad's main concern has been to put other people first. You know, he has his moments, he has his grumbles, he's not perfect. But I think through the very act of putting other people first and reaching out to others with kindness, he's very much benefited himself. It's very unusual for someone to live with multiple sclerosis for 30 years. And he's always really positive and really, really caring of others. And I love him very much. You can tell. And the main reason I wanted to talk about him today was a month ago he had another infection where he started to lose his presence of mind. It was a urinary tract infection, and it was the effect of the medication, really. And it's the first time I'd seen him really just frustrated and struggling, because I think it requires a certain presence of mind to be able to practice metta. And he seemed a bit lost, and that affected me a lot. So that's, anyway, the good news is he's made a very good recovery, and I'm going to see him on Thursday. So moving on to the second aspect, power of metta to benefit others. So we can wish ourselves all sort of good fortune, we can wish ourselves protection from misfortune. But of course the metta bhavana practice moves us on from this very familiar self-concern, this natural self-concern, towards others. So metta is an act of imagination. In many ways, we'll be looking at the imagination through this year's theme, but maybe the greatest act of imagination as a human being is to be able to imaginatively identify with others, to put ourselves in others' shoes, to imagine what their life might be like. Yes, obviously I am important to myself. It's not me in isolation, it's me in relation to others. So metta is an active, expansive response to others. So yes, the wish can be for ourselves, but actually the happiness comes from reaching out to others. Another little story. These little stories allow me to move away from the lecture. So I've talked before about my previous work in India, and I worked for 4 years in a village project near Calcutta. And I want to say a little bit about the gentleman who started that project. His name is K.C. Thomas. He's an Indian man. He was a priest. He was working alongside Mother Teresa in Calcutta. But he had a difference of opinion, a difference of vision about the best way to look after young people. So what he did was he got permission to leave the priesthood, and he got married to his wife Kavita, who was a very young, very inspired woman. And they started this village project, and so the basis of this project is to recruit Indian couples, married couples, who are willing to foster children and to bring them up as their own, whether they have their own children or not. And that's been going for 35 years. So Casey is still working there as a 75-year-old. And hundreds of children have gone through that place, and it's affected some more than others. But there are some amazing stories, like the story of a little girl called Runa, who was brought to the home, who was found in a field with her umbilical cord still connected. She was brought to the home, which is called Familia. And around that time, Casey and Kavita were considering having their own child, because they were in their late 30s, 40s by then. And they just immediately made the decision that this is our child. And yeah, she's graduated. She's got a good job in Calcutta now. But that's one of hundreds. So what's interesting about Casey is sometimes he writes to me, and his emails are sort of full of doubts about how well he's done. So he's very aware he had a particular vision, and he's had to make compromises, and sometimes he hasn't been able to do what he set out to do, and he gives himself quite a hard time. And of course, when I write back to him, all I can point out to him is, look at the effects that you've had on all these children. Don't doubt those effects. So the message here that I want to get across is that when we feel that we're not living up to expectations, look at what's already been achieved, because that can never be taken away. And never underestimate the positive effects that you have already caused through acts of loving kindness, words of loving kindness. And many of the effects you won't be aware of. And these effects, they aren't trivial byproducts. They are real effects that are rippling out and benefiting actual people. So I think it's good sometimes just to reflect and rightfully draw confidence and joy from just reflecting on the effects of kindness. It's allowed. We can do that. Okay. So, the power of metta to create Sangha. The power of metta to create harmony between self and other. So it's not only that we're individuals having effects on ourselves and other individuals, we're also trying to create a context in which the barriers between self and other start to soften, where people can thrive together, where spiritual progress is far more likely to occur, and it becomes somehow less important about which particular individuals are making the progress. It's much more of a collective context. So in other words, we need a Sangha. One of the great demons of our age, particularly in the West, is an individualism, which gives rise to alienated and fragmented lives, fragmented existences. And I'm not only talking here about being with other people, it's an attitude of mind. So I know for myself that actually some of the times in my life when I've been most lonely is when I've been with other people in meaningless contexts. So it's not just about being with people. So the great work of the Sangha is to tame the demon of a belief in the separateness of self and other. And the Sangha flourishes or fails depending first and foremost on the power of metta. Perfect. So I'd like to illustrate this with a story, or it's a story in two parts from the life of the Buddha. So this is it's a historical account. But just because it's a historical account, it doesn't mean we have to slip into a sort of rational way of listening. We can still let it speak to our emotional depths. And historical stories can also have mythic significance. So I'm going to try and draw some of that out. Now, being in the panto mode, I'd like 3 volunteers to help me to tell the first part of the story, and all you have to do is hold a piece of paper saying who you are. You don't actually have to say anything. So, hey.
Go on then, Mala.
Hey. Okay, so and you ready? Okay, so I'll just set the scene. So basically, I'm going to be the voice of these people, so when I'm speaking through their mouth, I'll just do that. This is an old drama technique. So the scene is a place called Kosambiya. Kosambiya is a place near Shravasti, which at the time of the Buddha was probably the biggest city in that part of India. And these events are happening 10 years after the Buddha's enlightenment. And really it's a story of the first serious split that happened in the Sangha. So, we have this gentleman who is an expert in rules. He loves rules. He's a stickler for rules. Possibly a little bit obsessed, a bit obsessive, maybe a little bit petty. Nothing personal. I quite agree with that, actually. And there was another character who was an expert in teaching. Okay, so an eminent teacher, always with people to listen to her teaching. Possibly a bit proud, possibly a bit over-conscious of her status. We'll see. Okay. Good. Okay. So, for my prop. Oh. So, the key event centres around a latrine. Believe it or not. So, Kosambiya, there was basically a settlement of monks. And with these two big characters, the expert in rules and the expert in teaching. So one day, the experts in teaching went to the latrine, and after she'd finished her business, she committed the gross offence of leaving some water in the pot that lives outside the latrine. I don't know why that was an offence. I was trying to think about it actually. In modern India, it might be about a breeding place for mosquitoes. I don't know if there is an actual historical reason. But anyway, what you weren't supposed to do was leave water in the pot outside the latrine, which she didn't know, but he definitely did. So, just come a bit closer. Right. We haven't practiced. Okay. Was it you who left water in the pot outside the latrine? Yeah. Any problem? Don't you know that you broke a rule? Don't you know that you've offended against the code and conduct of the monks? Well, actually, I didn't know that. Oh, you didn't know that then? Oh, well, that's not a problem, because if you didn't know it, then it's not an offence. So, hey, let's call it quits. So. Yes. Okay, so I'm just going to be various pupils of these teachers. So, did you know that the teaching expert, he not only left water in the latrine pot, he didn't even know he made a mistake? Okay. So, I'm a pupil of his, speaking to a pupil of his. So, our teacher's just said that your teacher not only breaks rules, but doesn't know that she's doing it. Well, that's strange, because he told me it wasn't a problem. He told me, because I didn't realise it was an offence, then we'll call it quits. I think he's a liar. He's a liar. Our teacher says your teacher's a liar. You're a liar. They say you're a liar. Right, I'm going to convene an assembly of the elder monks, and we're going to talk about this. So then there's an assembly of monks, at which it's decided that this person over here is going to get suspended from the order. Good. I'm sorry to break this, but they've suspended you from the order. Well, I don't acknowledge that suspension. I didn't commit an offence. Well, at least I didn't know I committed an offence, so I don't acknowledge that. I think it's time that I got some support. Maybe the venerable ones would like to take sides with me. That's a quote. And also, why don't you go out into the countryside and contact all of my supporters and tell them what's happened, and come back, because I need support. Okay. I forgot what happened. Okay. So basically what happens is both characters enlist other people's support, and the divisions deepen and they escalate. And they draw in more people like a whirlpool, and it becomes increasingly bitter. And they end up, to quote, stabbing each other with verbal daggers, brawling and quarrelling, wrangling and disputing. And they're constantly trying to convince each other, to persuade each other to each other's point of view, but they're unable to, and it's a complete standoff. It's stalemate. At which point, somebody decides it's probably a good idea to tell the Buddha. I'm afraid something's kicking off in Kosambiya. I really think you ought to know about it. Oh no, there'll be schism in the Sangha. So here goes. So you can go on. So you are both disciples of the Buddha. So the Buddha decides to give them a stern warning. The two two characters and all of their factions. The Buddha says, "Enough with your wrangling and disputing, misguided men. This will lead to your great harm, your great suffering for a long time." And then what he does is he gives a talk, not using a flip chart. He gives a talk on the 6 conditions for harmony in the Sangha, which are briefly metta in bodily action, metta in acts of speech, metta in mind, and then shared possessions, sharing things without reservation, shared ethics, the ethics that set us free, and the shared noble vision of liberation. So that's his teaching to these troublesome monks. And one of the monks responds like this. "Don't worry yourself, Lord. Why don't you go and live in peace? And because we're the ones who are responsible, we created this. So why don't you just go in a forest somewhere and meditate and be at peace and leave this to us? Okay? Okay. So then the Buddha leaves. And at some point after leaving, says the following words: "These monks seem obsessed. It's impossible to make them see. When many voices shout at once, none considers himself a fool. Though the Sangha is being split, none of them thinks himself at fault. Breakers of bones and murderers, cattle thieves, pillagers. When even these can act together, why can't you? Better it is to walk alone. There is no companionship with fools." So then back in Kosambiya. So right, where were we? Okay, the end. Okay. So sometime after those events, the monks from that community went on their alms round, as demonstrated by Ratnaprabha last week with the begging bowls, and they went to all the local villages begging for their daily food. And what happened is that the villagers got to hear of the behaviour of the monks, the fact that they'd become polarised into factions, and that there was this brawling and wrangling. And they refused to give, they all decided that they were going to refuse to give any donations of food to the monks. At which point, funnily enough, the monks decided that maybe they ought to sort it out after all. And so they were forced to go and find the Buddha to sort things out, but by that time the Buddha was long gone. And we're going to pick up the story of the Buddha later. So, what has gone wrong in Kosambiya? Well, the main thing that's gone wrong is a failure of metta practice in that community. A failure to practice metta, body, speech and mind, both openly and privately. So because of that, they've remained polarised and they started to gravitate around fixed positions and fixed views. So there's a failure of metta and bodily action. They fail to take responsibility for their own behaviour, and instead they're consumed with analysing other people's faults, nursing resentments, and even worse, blaming and preaching. And then there's a failure of metta in speech. So speech has really, really powerful effects. We can easily underestimate the power of speech for good or ill. It's really important in the context that we're in to take opportunities to speak loving words and to praise others' qualities. So what happens is, in Kosambiya is a lot of gossip, a lot of slander, a lot of backbiting, there's hearsay, and all of these are really highly destructive for the welfare of that community. And these traits towards gossip and towards backbiting, they're a very seductive way for human beings to build alliances, to raise ourselves higher somehow. And it's not always as serious as sometimes it's actually very difficult not to get drawn in, not to collude with this type of speech. And then in Kosambiya there's a failure of metta in mind. So we really need to work on our minds, to nurture the thoughts and feelings out of which loving speech and action will grow. And we need to counteract thoughts and feelings that will lead to quarrels. So in the fourth stage of the Metta Bhavana, we have a chance to acknowledge any resentments or irritations or grudges, but that's not all we do. Then we have a chance to look into why. Where has that come from? What's my part in that? Am I seeing things the way they really are? Am I seeing that person in their fullness? We get a chance to expand out, to see more of that person than just the parts that infuriate us or irritate us. So I think sometimes we're in the habit of somehow giving our feelings very, very raised status. It's almost like we enshrine our feelings. We put rigid walls around our feelings, but like all features of being a human being, feelings, the nature of feelings is to change, is to pass. And rather than putting rigid walls around our feelings and saying, these are my feelings and they're really, really important. Yes, first we acknowledge what's going on, but then we need to allow them to do what feelings do, which is to change. So in short, we need to do the Metta Bhavana as a duty, actually. And duty is not a very fashionable word these days. But it's a duty to our brothers and sisters so that we're all making the efforts to maintain the conditions that conduce to harmony for a healthy Sangha. Just a couple of other points about this story. So this great split in the Sangha started with water in a latrine pot. So breaks in harmony are usually nearly always down to non-essential matters. So the deeper that we can go into practice and take responsibility for our own mental states, the less likely these sorts of things will break out. So in the Metta Bhavana, we look deeply into the essential things that unite us with others, whether they're friends or enemies or strangers. The drives that we all have, the needs that we all have, the aspirations that we all have, the longings that we all have. It's only by dwelling at that level can we see through the thick fog that's created by our entrenched positions. An analogy for this is as if we're all mountains in a mountain range, and we get so high up ourselves, shall we say, that we enter the mist, we enter the fog, and in such we look around and we can't see much other than what we think and what we feel. And somehow we have to descend the mountain. We have to go underneath the mist and the fog and look around us so that we can actually see people as people, human beings as human beings. I used to work as a volunteer mediator. So this was neighbourhood disputes, and nearly always we entered a situation, and it was a bit like Kosambiya. It escalates. It started with something small, it escalated into something huge, very polarised positions, infuriated people. And over the process of mediation, basically what we used to do is first listen to what people had to say, so acknowledge people's feelings, and then just sort of take the focus of the discussion more to the level of people's actual needs, people's interests. And when people were talking about their needs and their values, they were far more likely to see that they weren't that different from the other person. So in this story, the Buddha moves on. So he makes an attempt to settle the dispute. But in the end he has to move on, and he's deeply saddened. He knows that they're causing themselves great harm, but he can't do anything about they are so caught up in ill will that they're not able to be receptive even to the Buddha. So sometimes we just have to accept that we can't solve other people's quarrels. And this can be difficult, but we have to, in a way, we have to bear the sadness of that fact. Maybe sometimes the best thing that we can do is to avoid taking sides. It's actually quite a difficult thing to do. And the final point about the story, so right at the end, the monks are refused food by the villagers. So when we get involved in disputes, it is as if we are cutting ourselves off from what really sustains us, what inspires us. So our mind becomes full of righteous indignation. And it's as if we're starving ourselves of the nutrition of mutual love and respect and harmony and collective aspirations. It's almost as if we go on hunger strike over a really petty issue without realising that we're just depriving ourselves of the energy to do the work that really needs to be done. Okay, so at some point after these events, the Buddha was wandering in the area, and he came to another place called Kosambiya. So at Kosambiya there was a wood full of sal trees. So sal trees are very tall trees, and when they bloom they have very red flowers with very beautiful scent. So we can imagine the Buddha, after the events of Kosambiya, being attracted by the scent of this beautiful wood. And so he's approaching the wood, and outside of this wood, which is part of a larger park, there's a park keeper. So the park keeper saw the Buddha and didn't recognise him. And he said, "I'm afraid you're going to have to leave this area, because there's 3 very, very venerable monks meditating in this wood, and they're dwelling in peace and bliss, and they're striving for liberation, so please don't disturb them." But luckily, this happened in the earshot of one of those monks who's called Anuruddha. And Anuruddha was the actual cousin to Buddha. And he was really delighted, really happy to see the Buddha, of course, invited him in. So then there's a bit of an interplay between the Buddha and these 3 monks. So these 3 monks were called Anuruddha, Nandiya, and Kimbila. But for reasons that will become obvious later, they've become known as the 3 Anuruddhas. So the Buddha asked a series of questions to the 3 Anuruddhas. So the first question is, are you living in harmony? And the response of the Anuruddhas was, yes, we look at each other with kindly eyes. So the word is priya chakshu, the eye of affection. We see each other with kindly eyes. We blend like milk and water, free from differences. And I can't help but thinking the Buddha was probably quite relieved to hear that after the events in Kosambiya. So then he asked the second question, how have you achieved this harmony? How have you gone about creating this harmony? So then the response from the Anuruddhas was, we have realised what a great opportunity it is to practice amongst friends, to live with such good friends. We practice metta at all times, in body, speech and mind, in open and privately. And we put aside our own individual preferences and we do what each other want to do. So I set aside what I want to do and I make a practice of doing what my friend wants me to do. And then they finish by saying, we are 3 individual people, but our hearts and minds are united. In truth, we have only one mind, only one heart. We are 3 bodies, but with one mind. So the Buddha's very pleased with this, but he's sort of fascinated by how well they're doing, and he asks for more details. So he asks, well, what does that look like in practice? What do you do in practice to express that? So then there's an account of some very sort of ordinary, straightforward details of that community. So when they've been begging for food, so the first person that comes back sets the table, gets the water ready, gets things ready, puts water out for washing and drinking. And then the last person that comes back eats whatever's left and then clears up. Whoever notices that something needs done, does it. Whoever needs help with a task indicates that he needs help. And so because of this way of living, that actually most of the time they don't need to speak. It's just every 5 days, every 5th day they have a discussion on the Dharma. So that's what their practice looks like. And then a final question from the Buddha. So how are you progressing spiritually? You know, are you getting close to enlightenment yet? And through discussion, it becomes clear that they are all very close to enlightenment as a collective experience. So actually they haven't discussed with each other, oh, I think I'm nearly enlightened. But they all seem to know that each of them is very close to enlightenment. And also in the story it says that this has very, very positive effects that ripple out to the surrounding areas, to the people who live around the wood, which is the direct opposite of the dispute at Kosambiya, where people are drawn in to the whirlpool of argument. So in this story with the Anuruddhas, the effects are expansive, they're moving outwards. Okay. So I want to say a little bit about the park keeper, because park keeper rarely gets a mention. So I reckon that the park keeper is the part of me that doesn't want my practice to be disturbed by others, that sees others somehow as an obstacle to my practice, somehow a distraction. I quite often get this in the Red Shrine Room, which is not a particularly quiet and secluded part of the building. So I'll be in there meditating, and then the door goes, and then the door goes again. Someone starts stomping very loud in the men's community. That's actually probably me, because my room's above the Red Shrine. And yeah, I mean, like, who are these people coming to this Buddhist centre when I'm trying to meditate? We'll get into that. And it's the part of us that misses the incredible value of friendship with those who might just be wiser than us, who might just have something to offer us, more than that particular meditation even. So the Anuruddhas, they realise the precious opportunity that has been presented to them by the Buddha's visit. Above all things, they value being in the presence of the person who embodies their ideals, who they love, who they revere. So the Buddha says in the Dhammapada, there's a verse, follow one who is wise, as the moon follows the path of the stars. So really recognise the value of people who have something to teach us, above all things. So the Buddha's first question is about harmony. So this is uppermost on his mind, of course, because of the events at Kosambiya, where he's really seen the really harmful effects of polarised views, of quarrelling and disputing. His first question is not about, are you following the precepts? It's not, how's your meditation going? It's not, he doesn't quiz them on their Dharma knowledge. He doesn't ask them about their attainments. What he's really interested in is harmony, because it's very clear to him at that time that this is the essential condition for progress. Harmony is the environment in which all of the practices can thrive and prosper. If we haven't got that right, then the other practices aren't going to thrive. So, when asked how they've created harmony, the first response is related to gratitude. The words they use are, I reflect what a great gain it is for me to live with such companions in the spiritual life. So as well as appreciating the visit of the Buddha, the Anuruddhas also realise the precious opportunity of friendship with those who are at a similar level to them, a similar level of progress. And they reflect on all the blessings and all the benefits of such friends, the shared values, the acts of kindness, the friendliness, the support, the challenge as well. And because of that, they experience deep gratitude, deep appreciation, which in themselves are highly positive emotions. And then they move on to talk about metta. So it's as if out of that reflection on the benefits that they've received from their brothers, that flows very naturally into sending loving kindness to them and practicing that in body, speech and mind. So through practicing metta in all situations, they're able to experience a much deeper solidarity, which means that disputes do not arise between them. They've all taken responsibility for ensuring their mental states are positive. And in a very real way, their collective practice of metta protects them from the negative effects of ill will. And it creates this context where they can all make real progress. So this flow continues because from their wholehearted practice of metta, that leads into a willingness towards self-surrender. So the natural consequence of this practice is that they are willing to give up their own individual wills for the sake of a single mind of loving kindness. And that single mind of loving kindness is far more powerful. Maitridasa sometimes describes this state as one-heartedness. And this isn't the same as just going along with others, but secretly nursing resentments. It's not going along just to keep the peace. So the three Anuruddhas, they're very well integrated. They know their own minds, and they're very well established in self-metta. So they have a strong concern for their own well-being. And out of that comes a realization that much more is possible for all of them if they're willing to freely put aside their individual wills. Okay, so this talk seems to be fluctuating between ideals and where we actually are. So back to here and now. So what the lessons from these two stories, what might this look like for us here and now? Well, there's an endless list, but I'm going to make a few suggestions. Really, they're suggestions to myself, so I share them with you. So, just go back to this. So in the area of bodily action, so acting on kind impulses. So quite often I'll have a kind impulse and then I'll let it pass and I'll forget about it. And it can be simple things like phoning a friend up, writing a note, doing the washing up after the class so that the group the next morning isn't faced with a big mountain of washing up. Responding to a request for help. Even better, helping someone without them having to ask. And also asking for help when you need it. And probably most importantly in this area is being openly friendly. Be an example of metta in action. This can be really, really attractive for others who are sort of coming in from the alienated world that I described before. It's very fascinating, very attractive to see friendliness and harmony in action. So we can be part of that. And then in the area of speech. So expressing your gratitude and appreciation can be a bit embarrassing sometimes, I think. But I just think it's really important to overcome our reservations about it and just tell people how much we appreciate them. Sometimes we see people who are clearly making an effort, but they're a bit down in the dumps or they're a bit discouraged for some reason. And it's really important to sort of reach out to people and encourage them when they're obviously making an effort. We can notice when someone's looking out of sorts, a bit down, a bit lost, and just say a kind word. That simple kind word can have a really dramatic effect actually. It has the power to bring peace into turmoil. We can make a practice of apologising for any upset we may have caused, any part that we feel we may have played in any ill feeling. Just make a practice of apologising for that. And occasionally, if you're really concerned that someone is acting, speaking or thinking in a way that will do harm to themselves or others, and if you're really confident that you are motivated by that concern, sometimes we need to be prepared to say something. in the right way, in the right place, at the right time. This too can have a really dramatic effect, although it's uncomfortable for everyone concerned. People often look back to how crucial it was that someone pointed something out to them with kindness, just at the right time. So metta is not just about being cheerful, agreeable, nice and lovely. Essentially, it's about being the means to each other's growth, each other's transformation, and ultimately each other's freedom. And then in the area of metta in the mind. So we can reflect on the benefits that we've received from others. Sometimes we can just pause to look around us sometimes and see people with this eye of affection, these kindly eyes, the eye of appreciation, the eye of non-possessiveness. Try not to do it by freaking people out. We once had a practice of this in the shop when you were behind the till, to look at people with kindly eyes, and it did backfire a few times. Increasingly, we can make the Sangha an emotional focus in our life. And there's something quite countercultural about this, where the model tends to be we have our major relationship which meets most of our needs, and then we have a circle of friendship around that. I think it's really important to got the opportunity here to emotionally invest in friendships, to risk ourselves in friendships, and to be a good friend to others. And most importantly, in this area is the practice of metta bhavana. Practicing metta both on the cushion and off the cushion. And it's really important that we stick with this. It's not everyone's cup of tea, but it's important to find ways to keep engaging with the practice. If you're stuck, ask for help. Because I think the moral of this story is that abandoning the practice of metta bhavana because we're having problems or we don't like it has collective effects. So we can see our practice of metta bhavana and really sort of working hard at it as a gift to others in the Sangha. Okay. So a few words in the last section. So in the story of the Anuruddhas, we saw this flow from gratitude through to practice of metta, through to the willingness to self-surrender, until they reach this mysterious point of being three bodies with one mind, this mysterious state of one-heartedness. This is a really powerful symbol of the collective aspect of enlightenment. Sometimes when we say the word enlightenment, it's very easy to think of in terms of individual attainment. Because the Anuruddhas have broken down the barriers between them, they have reached a mysterious higher level of being, which is beyond mere individuality. So they're more able to communicate deeply, to serve each other, to go beyond themselves. And it's not that they've sacrificed individuality. Quite the opposite, in fact. Actually, they're more truly individual than they have ever been, because they're no longer dictated to by selfish concern. They are fully conscious, fully creative, fully themselves. But the progress that they've made is a collective experience. They are broken through together into the mystery of the wisdom of interconnectedness, the wisdom of unity. So at the heart of enlightenment, the heart of spiritual freedom, lies profound loving union. So in this age of alienation, our heart cries out with longing for joyful union with something truly beautiful, something genuinely satisfying. As Vajani was talking about last week, it's as if the noblest part of us, the best part of us, yearns to be united with the highest in the universe. So metta has the power to take us beyond our usual alienated experience towards this, what's often described as the further shore. It's the further shore it's shrouded in mist. We don't quite know what's there. We don't know what enlightenment is, but still there's part of us that recognises and longs to move towards that further shore. And on that further shore is this mysterious experience of one-heartedness, a profound solidarity with other beings. And in this mystery, the very notions of being, the very notions of self and other, subject and object, lover and loved, they start to tremble, they start to shake. And out of this trembling is unleashed an outpouring of selfless compassion. So Sangha wrote, when he was very young, he wrote a very long poem called The Veil of Stars. It's a fascinating poem because it charts an experience that he had as a young man of falling in love. So the poem starts with desire, actually. And then through the poem, he talks about how he works with that desire and how he channels that into something positive. So near the end of that poem, there's a verse which is, "Desire for anyone flowers into love for someone, and at last bears fruit as compassion for everyone." So where love unites with the wisdom of no fixed self, in the context of a Sangha, it becomes an even greater love. This greater love is known as Maitri, the great love, which is a force for good that transcends any particular individual. It's a force that fascinates and attracts beings to it, a force that pacifies hatred and hostility, a force that destroys separateness, rigidity, polarization, and a force above all that matures and enriches anyone that comes into contact with it, just as the sun shines and the rain falls equally on dormant seeds in the desert, providing them with the resources they need to wake up and grow into what they could become. And in the great Mahayana text, the Vimalakirti Nidesha, this is described as that great love that is enlightenment itself, because it is a unity of experience. And finally, back to here and now, and the practice of Metta Bhavana. So the practice, as I said before, starts from where we are and leads us closer to this great love that ultimately is enlightenment itself. So Metta Bhavana is a practice. It's a practice run. It's as if we're rehearsing, preparing the ground, making it more likely for this love to erupt amongst friends. So as I said before, it is vital that we all do the Metta Bhavana. And in the fifth stage, sometimes, we do have a chance to experience a flow of metta, even a flood of metta, at its most powerful and energetic. But it's not as though we're trying to pump something out. It's more as if we are opened up and we invite others in. So an analogy for this in one of the texts is the practice of metta is like a trumpeter in a city climbing to the top of a tower and playing the trumpet so that it can be heard in all directions, inviting people to a great feast. We may get a sense of somehow knots untangling, of limited expectations and barriers dissolving, even of me dissolving. And that sounds a bit frightening. But in the same poem as I quoted from before, Sangha describes this as an intensely joyful and beautiful experience. When we get the sense of me as a fixed, limited being somehow dissolving, it's a beautiful experience. And I'll just finish with the final couple of verses from his poem. What joy it is to realise that every atom of the universe is reflected in my heart, and that the love of my heart is mirrored in every atom. Reality is reflected in my heart as love, and this love of mine is mirrored in the all-embracing bosom of reality. The secret of love is to love. Let the silence speak.